All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 18th of October, 2023, and this is the APIServer network proxy meeting, which is a subproject of SIG cloud provider. And as such, we follow the Kubernetes SIG's community guidelines, which basically means please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated. We have a pretty short agenda today. There was one item I put on the agenda. I wanted to talk, sync up with Joseph about our slides for KubeCon, but Joseph has had a conflict and won't be able to join today, so I'll save that for next time, or sync up with him on Slack. I guess Imran, were there any topics you wanted to cover, or did you want to review from last week or anything?
Just one thing, I see something about there is a concern about backward compatibility with the change that is in pull request 5 to 5. Is there some form of elaboration on that front as to what is a breaking change?
I'm trying to refresh my memory from last week. I think there was a concern that if we change the behavior, right? Because one of the things we were talking about was changing the behavior so that in the future, you would either have to have an agent ID, or if the API server part, if the server part generates an agent ID or requires agents to connect with an ID, that we might create an incompatible scenario where if users are running with older agents that don't send the agent ID, or their agents have not been updated to send the ID, and we change the server so that the server now requires some sort of agent ID, then there was a concern that we would create a scenario where someone might be on a new server but have an old or a not updated agent, and then the agent wouldn't be able to properly advertise itself to the server. And so I think that was the issue we were talking about. But honestly, I would say it's probably worth going and checking the recording, because it was a little nuanced, but it was around that mechanism of, right now we don't require the agent ID. But in the future, we would like to have the agent ID there because it makes it easier to track these connections from the server side, or to track the precedence of connections. But we couldn't quite come up with a way that would also be backward compatible and allow people to connect with no agent ID, and then in the future somehow change it. So we talked about perhaps as we go to GA, at some point we'll deprecate this API and say that in the future you'd be required to have an agent ID. We didn't make any decisions about that, but that was just kind of what we were discussing.
Thanks for the context. I will take a look at the recording.
Cool.
So if I can add just a little nuance to that.
Oh yeah, hey Walter, I didn't see you come in. Hey.
So specifically, the agent ID is required for some routing strategies and not others. And so the routing strategies that need it required it, but the routing strategies that don't. And so, yeah, Joseph was suggesting, hey, can we make it required in all cases? Well, he put a PR out, and I noted that his PR was actually was going to break in those cases because it was essentially would break people with routing strategies that didn't need an agent ID, because he was there was this idiosyncrasy of the code which ended up requiring it, and so it would fail if there wasn't an agent ID. So Joseph changed the PR slightly so that it wouldn't require the agent ID unless the route did, and then and I have a slightly different memory than Elmiko at the very end of this, which is that I thought we had actually recommended that it would be okay to be a little backward incompatible by requiring at the agents, or start by requiring at the agent side that it be given an agent ID. because the thought process had been, if the agent fails to start because it needs an agent ID, at that point, anyone can see the problem and it's pretty obvious. And we thought that was probably okay. What we didn't want was having the server require the agent's ID and sort of almost silently fail connections during, you know, what I would think of as the main runtime. And I don't quite know how we got involved in this, but yeah, I mean, I think I basically agree with everything Almiko said, but I thought that nuance might be valuable to add.
No, you're absolutely right. And I had forgotten that. You're right. We didn't want to force it at the server side, but if there was a way we could promote agents to start requiring it on start, yeah, that would actually make the problem go away and probably be the best solution for us. And just for background, you know, Imran and I were discussing, and he was saying how he had missed the last meeting, but saw this item and thought it looked interesting. So that's how we got into the discussion about backward compatibility.
I agree with Imran. I actually think this is an interesting item, and it's sort of not just because it individually is interesting, which I agree with, but also because I think it's the sort of thing that is the sort of thing we need to start considering more as you know, more people use the API server network proxy, and as you know, just as the project matures.
Now that I think about it, I did have one or something to talk about that is related to the agent identifiers flag. So basically a way we tell agents, like the agents tell to the connectivity server on which sort of domain, for which domain the server should choose a particular agent, and a default out being true or false. On that front, I was thinking, let's say there are two agents. One is saying that, okay, anything that is related to, you know, as in the example, it says like, okay, node1.mydomain.com, then send it to me. And for anything else, choose a different agent. So that agent would have default route as true, and the first agent would have default route as false. Now, in that case, I was wondering, there is no nothing happening, nothing that is stopping from a rogue agent or anything that can set up this agent identifier and direct the traffic to itself. I was wondering if some provisions should be made on the server end to prevent that sort of security lapse happening.
So one, if you have a proposal, I'd love to hear it. So two, I think that is sort of true, but maybe there is one piece of protection that is worth noting in there, which is that you can require the agent to authenticate to the server, right? So I agree that you keep that there's no real way of saying you're authenticated, but I also separately want to validate that you that you are eligible to route this kind of traffic to. So if you have a great idea for that, great, because we don't have that. But I would at least say that you know that the agent can be authenticated. So you know, it's up to you to decide it. Once someone's authenticated, how much do you trust them, right? So I mean, for a lot of people, I think the answer would be, I've authenticated them. At this point, I trust them. But if you want an additional layer, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be a reasonable thing to do. And in fact, if I were OpenShift, not to throw anything at anyone, and I had, I was doing something like namespace and other kinds of partitioning, I could actually see where maybe that would very much make sense. I mean, for my use cases, not so much, but I could see where if you're actually, you know, doing some sort of multi-tenant system, that absolutely this would make sense.
So what I'll do is I'll think more on it, and then if there is something that in terms of a proposal that I can put forward, then I'll certainly discuss in the meeting first.
I as a related one, and it's only vaguely related, but the thing that has always surprised me is that no one and maybe we just need to have this as a starter project kind of thing, but on the routing, I'm always surprised we don't have a failure zone routing. And I've always thought that that would be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, one more thing that I wanted to just sort of, I don't know what problem it was, but we noticed a problem when we enabled the toggle sync forever on the agent side, and we had sort of issues. So I'm still putting together sort of like a postmodern stuff thing, what really went wrong, and was it something on the underlying infrastructure on the Microsoft side or the AKS side that caused a problem, or was it something inherently wrong on the sync forever flag that could potentially be problematic for others as well?
Yeah, I would definitely be fascinated to see the postmortem on that. If it's not exposing anything you don't want to expose, like what was the problem you were seeing?
So, in terms of the problems that we were seeing, I was expecting that the delay in terms of new agents coming up and then getting connected with connectivity server, always having the latest metadata about it. We saw that not all agents were getting connected. So suddenly when there was an upgrade scenario and let's say there were 5 connectivity agents and there were only 4 connections that were made, and one of the agents was not able to connect.
That's fascinating. I mean, I'm not saying it's not related, but I mean, the one thing I would point out about the sync forever flag is it was designed to allow agents to notice when new servers came online. So, you know, it's basically the agents are supposed to periodically attempt to connect to a new connectivity server through a load balancer once every sync period, which I think is like a minute, with the idea that if a new sync server comes or a new connectivity server comes online, they will eventually connect to it, realize that there are more, that new connectivity servers have come online, more than what they were originally aware of, and so could then fix their connectivity. So that's
Yeah, so this was only
interesting.
noticed in the upgrade, whenever there was an upgrade scenario.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a fascinating problem. I'm really curious to see because I I'm not immediately seeing how sync forever could cause this. Doesn't mean it can't. So yeah, I'd be fascinated if we do have a problem there to see, you know, what happened.
yeah. So definitely, as I said, like I'm still getting all the pieces together on what happened, and I'll try to formulate something, whether this was, as I said, like underlying AKS issue or something related to the flag itself.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Imran.
Yeah, very cool. So I had a question about the previous one, and this is just to kind of like satisfy my curiosity. But on this issue about the agent identifier and multiple agents connecting, and it sounded like, Imran, you were talking about a situation where an agent might try to actually connect back to itself. So is this like, I realize now after the discussion that some of this was also about, do we trust the agent? So you don't want this kind of traffic, but is this like almost like some sort of hairpinning type prevention, or what's kind of the deeper, I guess, explanation there?
So the deeper explanation is that we are trying out one of the scenarios or one of the workarounds that we have when we don't want the traffic. So we have agents in the different namespace, different networks, and for certain like agents in the control plane namespace and agents in the customer namespace. Okay, so we are trying out that scenario, and what if the traffic that was intended for the agents in the control plane namespace, and what if there's an agent on the customer network side, or any other rogue agent that captures, or with the help of agent identifiers, and tricks the connectivity server to send the traffic to itself rather than to the agents on the control plane.
Yeah, I mean, I think a concrete example, the really evil concrete example of this would be if you had a agent that could get the right permissions to authenticate. You could authenticate from the control plane, claim if you could work out what routing to do, claim you were for the control plane, intercept webhook, mutating webhook requests, and at that point you could do some really evil things. I mean, there's several nefarious things you'd have to work out how to do, which are not trivial, but you know, it would be definitely, I can see something saying where you'd want to essentially say, I really want to lock down user space agents to only ever be able to act as user space agents, and in fact, maybe even lock them down to a particular user space if you have some way of identifying your user spaces.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like if there were an attack here, that would be an extremely sophisticated attack to pull off. But I get what you're saying. Like, if you could get everything to line up right, then yeah, you could intercept very sensitive traffic through an agent that way. So cool. Thank you.
Well, and as soon as you've got mutating request permissions from you know, Rego or you know, OPA, like you see a right for permissions and you're like, oh, and I'll just add myself to these permissions.
Right, totally. It's like, as long as we're mutating objects, I'll get in on some of that. You know? Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other topics that we should get into today? And I would ask you both to please add yourself to the participants at your leisure. Not required, but definitely appreciated. Okay. If no one's got any topics, I say let's put a fork in this one and call it done. And I'll see you all at the next meeting.
Awesome. Thank you both, Imran and Elmiko.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Have a good one.